There we go.
Hi, hey Cody, how are
Hey,
you?
I'm great. How you doing, Bianca?
Good. For those of us who are just jumping on, um, this is Bianca Bruno. I'm the San Diego reporter for Courthouse News, and we are discussing our latest podcast for the Sidebar podcast, our latest episode, which discussed current U.S. Mexico border issues, and we had two of our Courthouse News reporters on the podcast, and that was Cameron Langford in Houston, Texas, and Cody Copeland, who is our Mexico correspondent based in Mexico City. And so we're going to talk today about kind of some updates, actually, even to the podcast, which was just recorded a week ago, and what we can expect for immigration and border policy under the Biden administration in his second year in office. So I will. Should we wait a couple seconds and see if more people join?
Sure.
Okay.
Maybe so. Hi, Amanda.
Okay. Well, we can get started, and this Twitter Spaces is also being recorded, so those who aren't able to hop on or hop on late can always catch it later. So Cody, you are our Mexico City correspondent, and you've, really, I think, because I've been with the company for about 6 years, you've really been integral in covering the on-the-ground reality of U.S. immigration policy and how it plays out in Mexico. And you recently traveled to the border to cover in real time the beginning of this policy that the Biden administration had to reinstitute based off of a court order last year. And it was something under Trump that when Biden took office, he wanted to get rid of. And that is known as the Migrant Protection Protocols, or Remain in Mexico is how it's more commonly referred. Can you talk about what that program is and kind of what the new version of it is?
Yeah. Migrant protection protocols were a Trump era policy designed to have asylum seekers wait out their waits for court dates in immigration courts in on the Mexican side of the border, and like much of these bureaucratic processes, they were just it was plagued with inefficiency, and so people found themselves waiting up to 2.5 years for these court dates. In big cities where it has been, one of the cities where it has been implemented, El Paso, Texas, there are four immigration court judges there. And when President Biden put the initial kibosh on Remain in Mexico 1.0, when he entered office, each one of those had about 4,500 immigration cases on its docket. So yeah, it's a pretty inefficient program, um, and uh, and like you said, it was reinstated uh, in court in last August, and then started up again in December of last year. And so it's kind of like the first program. It's the first iteration. It's been taking a while to kind of get off the ground.
Well, when we
Um,
when we recorded a couple of weeks ago, there were less than 300 people who had been returned just this year. So it was, essentially a slower start, like you mentioned. But what is the current number of people who've been returned to Mexico that are waiting there?
so the current number is According to what a UN migration agency spokesperson told CBS News, only 480 asylum seekers have been registered in the program and sent back to Mexico to wait this out. So it's still taking a while. But when I went to Juarez, I was surprised. I was expecting I just didn't know what to expect, and so I was expecting just tons of people in the shelters everywhere. And a couple shelters I visited were a little bit over capacity, but nothing like I expected. And so I spoke with the American Immigration Council, and they told me that actually is pretty much on par with the first iteration of MPP. It took about half a year to really ramp up to where we saw just kind of these really surprising numbers of 10,000 people put into the program by June, and it was implemented, the first one, in January 2019, and so by July, July, they were sending back 10,000 people in MPP 1.0.
And do we think the 2.0 version can have just as many people? Do you think at the height in the summer, are we going to be sending back 10,000 people a month again, or what's kind of the expectation
it
there?
Could. The expectation is all over the place because we don't really know. There's no calendar that says when the program. Right now, it's in San Diego, El Paso, and Brownsville, Texas, and so and it's planned on being rolled out to 3 or 4 other cities, but there's no calendar that says it will, when it's going to go to McAllen and when it's going to go to Nogales and all these other things. And so really it could reach those numbers again. It could be lower. From one estimation from what the U.S. Embassy told migrant shelters in Tijuana at the beginning, they said we're not going to send back more than 30 people at this bridge a day, or from this city a day. And so experts extrapolated that to the 7 cities when it's going to be fully rolled out. And so they said that could be around 6,500 migrants a day. So, but it could always, there's nothing to hold anyone to that number, and so they could put more in there. But one big difference is the main group of migrants who are from what is known as the Northern Triangle of Central America, which is El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. They are not allowed to be put into MPP 2.0 this time. And they make up the by far the largest chunk of migrants making their way up to the border. So that could have an effect on how many people we see.
Well, and so as part of this court order, the Biden administration did fight reinstating, they have fought reinstating, but they got rid of the Remain in Mexico program, right? And then a couple of states sued them, saying that they were going to have, financial burdens associated with being required to accept more migrants into their states, and they were successful. And so that's why we have this new 2.0 version. But as part of that court case, there was a requirement of the federal government to work with Mexico on accepting people, right? Because before, all these people were living in border towns just across the U.S.-Mexico border, and they were being kept on wait lists that were not maintained by the U.S. government. They were maintained by police in Mexico or other agents in Mexico, and some people not even, formally having any kind of designation. So what are some of the requirements under the new version to, in the hope of being more organized, I guess?
Well, one thing, in the hope of being more organized, I don't know if there's much that is you couldn't really call this program organized. What the Aaron Reichland Melnick from the American Immigration Council told me that he's like, if you're looking for good government on either side of the border in this program, you're not going to find it here. It's really just a big mess. Depending on where someone is coming from, they could be placed into MPP 2.0 or sent back with Title 42 or sent back to their home country. They could be sent to Tapachula and then bused to Guatemala. They could be, a Guatemalan person could be sent to Honduras under the pretense that this region needs to take care of or needs to take responsibility for this problem itself. But, anyone who knows anything about the region knows that Honduras is no safer than Guatemala and vice versa.
Well, let's talk more. Let's talk more about Title 42, because that's, when I was doing research for the podcast, you pointed me in the direction of saying, hey, Title 42 has been way more consequential for U.S. immigration policy the past couple of years, during COVID, than Remain in Mexico. But Remain in Mexico is really kind of what gets media attention. And unlike, Remain in Mexico in this court case that the Biden administration fought, he has continued Title 42, which Trump invoked during the pandemic. So can you kind of explain what Title 42 is and why it's still being used?
Title 42 is a U.S. health code, interpretation of U.S. health code that allows the government to bar entry to anyone who might bring in a communicable disease, in this case, COVID-19. And so it has been, it's been used as a pretext to send back far more migrants than Remain in Mexico ever has, because while migrants get turned away with Title 42 under the supposed fear that they might bring in COVID-19, Americans have been able to travel and go anywhere and come back. And I mean, they have been tested for COVID-19 and things like this, but so yeah, Title 42 is sending back just, the Remain in Mexico numbers are a drop in the bucket compared to the 1.5 million people that have been sent either back to Mexico or back to their home countries, or in either one of those other options that I mentioned earlier, since March 2020, when it was instated. And so it is still being used today. In fact, I was just reading earlier this morning about a migrant encampment in Tijuana that it started there back when Biden came into office, with many people thinking that, he's now going to open the borders, and he never did. For asylum seekers in that way, and they actually just Mexican authorities just bulldozed the place and put them in shelters and things like this. But unlike Remain in Mexico, the Biden administration has actually fought to continue doing Title 42 because, well, it has been said that it's so he doesn't look too lax on immigration for one side of the country, and then it's also been postulated that he tried to fight MPP just in order to not look too harsh on immigration either. So I mean, the guy's walking a very difficult line in the country right now, idealistically. Or ideologically.
Well, and some of his immigration administration officials are leaving because of that, right? They're unhappy with, what people who maybe propped him up and wanted him to be elected and work under him. They're saying he's not holding up his end of the bargain or his promises on immigration reform, right?
Yes. Yeah, he's lost a few senior members of his cabinet, of his administration because of that. I don't have the names here right now, but yes, it has caused some trouble with those in his administration who think that, you know, um, by continuing to expel people under Title 42, he's not fulfilling his campaign promises to have a more humane approach to border security and immigration.
And then I would just say, like, when you and I talked, it's interesting to talk to someone who covers immigration from in Mexico when I've covered it for many years, on the U.S. side of the border, and really from the perspective of how policy impacts people. But we talked a bit about how these, several Trump immigration policies led to the displacement of thousands of people, and we still don't know their location. And so for me, I covered the family separation litigation that was in San Diego, where we get updated numbers every month on how many parents were deported without their kids and they were unaccounted for. And there was a settlement in that case requiring NGOs hired by the government to basically go on door knocking campaigns in Central America to try to locate these parents. But there are still families who will never be reunited in that case. And so now, under these other two policies we were just talking about, Remain in Mexico and Title 42, there's more people being returned to Mexico, or they're even being sent to countries they have no connection to. And so are they being tracked at all? Does the government know, who they are and where they're being sent? And did we learn anything from the family separation issue?
No, it doesn't appear as though any lessons were learned. There's no tracking of folks when they're expelled. I was told that if a migrant's destiny when they are when they're caught at the border and expelled under Title 42 is kind of at the whim of the system, and even the whim of the personal whim of the agent dealing with them at that time. I was told, like, it might, their fate could depend on whether or not the border agent had lunch that day. So like, if they get sent to a country that's not their home country, that could be just because there was a plane available at the time to take them there. So, and if there's not, then they find a different way to expel them from the border. And if, that's sending them to Tapachula and then sending them to Guatemala, something like that. So no, there's nothing tracking these folks. In, one example, to be able to at least put some kind of number on people who are like lost within the system like this. When Biden ended MPP 1.0, it was one of the first things he did in office. He allowed people who were waiting in Mexico, and at that time there were around 25,000 people in the program waiting in Mexico, and he said, "Okay, y'all can come back." He called it a wind down period, and he said, "Y'all can come back and wait out wait for your court dates here in the States." But only about 13,000 of those people did so. And so the other 12,000 people, we just don't, there's no record of what happened to them. There's those possibilities that we've already mentioned. They could be working in Mexico. I've talked to migrants who've gotten fake papers to work in the formal economy, and then obviously you don't need papers to work in the informal economy. And I've been told by a lot of shelter directors that yes, people have left their shelters to go into the community and work and rent houses, and so there are probably lots of people just creating lives there at the border. I'm sure there are lots of people losing lives at the border as well. They are constantly targets for kidnapping, as almost backwards as that. There's people with nothing and they get kidnapped for ransoms, but it happens and then they get killed or abandoned or sold into certain industries, and so yeah, it's just a big mess, and there's no register of what is happening to these people.
Well, we'll look for your coverage as MPP ramps up this year, and especially this summer, when we could see those numbers increase a lot. So thanks to Cody, and
Thank you, Bianca.
we're going to turn to Cameron Langford now, who is the Houston reporter for Courthouse News, and he has covered some border litigation related to both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, and in particular with a very contentious levee project that's at the Rio Grande River, that was built by Biden, and has now been continued by it was built by Trump and continued by Biden, although the Biden administration is trying to frame it in a way that's maybe more palatable than under Trump. So, Cameron, can you talk about the status of that levee project and how the barriers look?
Yeah, the Biden administration wants to build a 13-mile stretch of levee wall, and it's basically going to be like an embankment with concrete on it. And they want to build about 6-foot walls on top, and the purpose is to shore up holes in a earthen levee that were put in by the Trump administration's wall construction project. And this is the Biden administration said it's to protect South Texas areas and towns from flooding. So, but this group called the Center for Biological Diversity sued late last month the Army Corps of Engineers because they're saying that they didn't release public records about the construction of that levee, the levee wall. And it's supposed to be like, under Trump, the walls were a lot higher. I think they were 15 feet or more. But this one's supposed to be 6 feet. But it's also going to include stadium lighting that stays on 24/7 and cameras and sensors for law enforcement. And it's also going to have, according to the Biological Diversity Center, going to have enforcement zones next to the river that are 150 feet wide. And those are cleared of vegetation. So I guess they put like weed killer on them.
And they're not the only ones opposed to this levee project, right? The National Butterfly Center has also been pretty involved and vocal in opposing it. So can you talk about what the center is and why they are involved in this fight as well?
That's a separate issue. The National Butterfly Center. It's a 100-acre preserve near Mission, Texas, on the Rio Grande, and it has about a lot of different butterfly species because it plants native plants or the butterflies are attracted to all these different plants. So different butterflies go for different plants. But the Levy Project we just talked about, that's a different thing. This group was involved in a group called We Build the Wall. It was backed by an Air Force veteran who lost some limbs over in Iraq, but he started this supposedly nonprofit to raise money to help Trump build his wall, basically from crowdfunding, and they basically put up like over $1 million for some contractors to put up a 3-mile stretch of wall near the Butterfly Center's refuge. And the Butterfly Center was saying that construction is going to damage our property, basically, because they're saying it was built right on the river, whereas the government usually builds it, set back from the river. And they said the way they built it in a sandbar, not very deep, it's likely to fall over. So,
and then what would happen if that were to happen?
Well, the Butterfly Center's director says that could cause major catastrophe downstream because there's a dam downstream, and it could, I guess, hit that structure and cause really bad flooding.
And so what's the status of that case?
Okay, the status of that case, it was removed to federal court, which was transferred to federal court. And because the Butterfly Center has been having these issues with QAnon conspiracists and right-wing groups, I guess they got caught up in the social media webs or whatever, and they're seen as, like supporting Trump by going against this place. But they just actually closed their doors earlier this month. But the case is so that the Butterfly Center opted to dismiss their claims in federal court, but a portion of their case was remanded to state court, and that's defamation and business disparagement claims against We Build the Wall and Colfage, because they were accusing the Butterfly Center's director and employees of trafficking women and girls across the border for sex work. So that should be interesting if that actually goes to trial down there.
Is there a potential date for when that might happen?
I'm not sure about the date right now.
And did you have anything else you wanted to add on some of your coverage on border issues in Texas?
Well, I could tell you one more thing about the Butterfly Association. They also have a lawsuit against Department of Homeland Security officials in Washington, D.C., and that's pending because they claim that the federal government illegally occupied and damaged their land when they were surveying for construction of a wall that was going to bisect part of their property. Mm-hmm. And one thing about the Remain in Mexico case I wanted people to look out for is that the Biden administration has asked the Supreme Court to look at the lower court cases that required the reinstatement of the program. So the Supreme Court's supposed to talk about if they want to take up the case on the 18th, I think, at a conference.
So just in a few days.
So that should be, this week, I guess Friday. So that should be interesting to see how the Supreme Court handles it, because they actually opted not to stay the ruling that reinstated it right after it happened. So that was a 6-3 ruling by, breaking down along conservative and liberal lines, how the justices are normally viewed.
Okay, so we'll be watching for that later this week if that case gets taken up by the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that should be a good one. The feds want them to hear arguments and decide, issue a ruling this year. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, so we'll see.
Well, thanks, Cameron, and thanks to Cody, and those who tuned in and who maybe were unavailable to tune in and will listen to our recap later. And this is Bianca Bruno. I'm the San Diego reporter for Courthouse News, and we're in our second season of the Sidebar podcast, and so we'd appreciate any folks who are interested in legal issues in the U.S. to listen and subscribe where you listen to podcasts. So thanks for tuning in.